to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So, when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go to hell. It was also said, "Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Both the reading from Deuteronomy and the reading from Matthew tell us that the difference between what is right and wrong, good and bad, life and death is clear. They seem to tell us that maybe the choices we make in our lives might not be as difficult as we make them out to be. In Deuteronomy, God is telling the people, through Moses, that once again they have a choice to make. They have already spent 40 years in the wilderness with Moses, and they're getting close to crossing the Jordan and finally entering the land of Canaan. We have heard stories about how the people had disobeyed God during their time in the desert. Perhaps the story of the people making a calf out of their gold jewelry and then worshiping it might be the best known example of their disobedience. Now God is creating another covenant with the people, and quite simply tells them, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. And later, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live." If we are presented with two such options, life or death, clearly we would choose life. If given the options of prosperity or adversity, clearly we would choose prosperity. And I'm sure that we would all rather take blessings than curses. I remember a few Sundays ago, Ruth was telling the children that she rather liked to be blessed when she sneezed. I'm sure we would all like to get as many blessings from God as possible. Yes, it seems so simple, but of course there's a lot more to it. As is always the case, things are not really so cut and dry. What do the people have to do in order to get life and prosperity and blessings from God? They're told that they must obey the commandments of the Lord their God, walking in his ways and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances. Okay, so getting God's blessing means that you have to do a whole lot more than just say, "I choose blessings." I choose life. It would seem that one must wholeheartedly commit one's life to following God. Today's reading from Matthew is a continuation of the Sermon on the Mount that we've been hearing over the past few weeks. Jesus told the people, before this reading, Jesus told the people that he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And in the section we read today, he seems to make the law even more strict than when it was given to Moses. He says that even looking with lust upon someone can be considered adultery, because it's as if you have already committed adultery in your heart. And he says that although divorce was technically allowed by the law, by doing so, a man was causing his wife to be an adulteress. Jesus is not using any kind of vague language or abstract examples. Instead, he seems to be laying out some pretty clear guidelines. There are times when the choices that we have to make in our lives are pretty clear-cut. Those are the choices that if we just stop and search our soul for a moment, we know the right choice to make. For example, let's say you're walking along and you see somebody drop some money out of their pocket. Okay, maybe for that split second you might think, I'm pretty lucky. I could really use that money. You might be tempted. And Jesus might criticize us for even having that bad thought. But we know that the right thing to do is to return the money to the person. We just have to think for a second about that. We could move on from that simple case to something a little bit less clear-cut. I heard a story from a priest who was on TV. He was talking about this family in the Great Depression who had several girls in their house. And the family didn't have very much money. They just had one good dress that all of the girls would share. So if one of the girls had a special occasion, she would be the one who would get to wear the dress. So this dress was very precious to them. And one day they took it to the dry cleaners, and somebody at the dry cleaners accidentally put a hole in the dress, and they tried to cover up the mistake, and they sent it back to this home. And when the girls found the dress and found this mistake, they were understandably very upset and immediately wanted to take the dress back and have the dry cleaners pay for the dress. But their mother had a different response. Their mother said, well, if you take the dress back, somebody is going to get fired, and this is just no time to be out of work. I was very impressed when I heard this story, and I thought my response would probably be a little bit more like that of the daughters. It was their only good dress, and the dry cleaner should take responsibility for their mistake and not try to cover it up. But then when we hear the mother's compassionate response, we might think, yeah, it seems like she had the right idea. She was conscious not only of her own family situation, but even of her neighbor's situation. We could move on from this example to more unclear and difficult questions. I'm not a person who can easily live in a world of stark dichotomies, good and bad, right and wrong. To me, a lot of times there is a lot of room for a gray area. Something that attracts me to the United Methodist Church is that they seem to embrace that reality. The reality that even some areas that might at first glance seem clear-cut may not be so. One example of this would be the United Methodist Church's stand on the issue of abortion. In some ways, it would be easier to just draw a hard line and simply say that abortion is the murder of an unborn child and allow no room for discussion. Instead, in the United Methodist Church, in its social principles, it states, our belief in the sanctity of unborn human life makes us reluctant to approve abortion, but we are equally bound to respect the sacredness of the life and well-being of the mother, for whom devastating damage may result from an unacceptable pregnancy. It later goes on to say, we cannot affirm abortion as an acceptable means of birth control, and we unconditionally reject it as a means of gender selection. election. The statement also says that the church opposes late-term abortions and also supports ministry toward women who have already terminated a pregnancy. Let's face it, life is complicated. Sometimes we have simple choices to make, but often our choices are difficult and carry a myriad of possible outcomes. At first glance of today's reading from Matthew, it may seem that Jesus was oversimplifying complicated situations and just making things more difficult for the people. How could he tell people that they were committing adultery just by having impure thoughts about someone, or that divorcing a woman would cause her to be an adulteress? Surely if Jesus were looking at a real case with real people, he would have a more reasonable solution, wouldn't he? Well, Jesus liked to push people to think more deeply about their actions. In this case, Jesus was talking to people about their relationship with the law. Maybe Jesus felt like the people were trying to follow the letter of the law, but were not thinking enough about its intention. Maybe they were trying to find loopholes, ways that they could stay within the law, but still kind of do what they wanted to do. And Jesus was telling them, you are missing the point. There were some people who accused Jesus of breaking the law because his disciples ate grain in a field on a Sabbath, or because he healed someone on a Sabbath. At that time, Jesus reminded them that the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. Jesus wanted people to remember that it wasn't just people's outward actions that were important, but also whether their hearts were really in the right place. Now, as we think about decisions that we make in our lives, some of them are straightforward and easy to make, but as we have seen, and as we know, many decisions are complicated and hard to sort out. If the right answer doesn't just pop out at us after thinking for a moment, we have to dig deeper. We have to make sure that our hearts are in the right place, and the right place is with God. Maybe we can test our decision by asking ourselves if we feel comfortable revealing our decision to God. Now, it's possible that we feel uncomfortable telling our decision to other people, maybe because of how it might affect them. But what's important is, can we honestly say that we're comfortable pronouncing our decision before God? I recently saw a story on the Today Show about a couple that had an extremely difficult decision to make. They had 3 children and had some difficulty in having those 3 children. But they dreamed of having a family with 4 children. And they had 2 older children and 1 younger child, and they wanted the younger one to have someone closer to her own age. So they had many difficulties getting pregnant and were using fertility treatments. Their youngest child was a daughter, was conceived using in vitro fertilization. And they still had several frozen embryos at the clinic that they planned on using. So they went back in to have another child, and the woman named Caroline had the in vitro fertilization, and they were then waiting to hear the results, whether she got pregnant. The news they received from the clinic was something they never would have imagined or expected. They were told that Caroline was pregnant, but that the embryo implanted belonged to another couple. That it sounds like something from a soap opera, but this was actually a real situation. So she was pregnant, but the child was 100% somebody else's biological child. They were completely shocked and very upset, and the choice that was presented to them was, it's your right to terminate the pregnancy, but if they didn't terminate it, she could carry the baby full term and then give it to the couple who were the biological parents, because they very much wanted a child, and these were their embryos that had been implanted. So the biological parents, it was also a shock for them, and they had a lot to think about. They really wanted this child. So Caroline and her husband, they made the decision that they would continue with the pregnancy. And it was not an easy pregnancy. It was a high-risk pregnancy, and she though there were all of these complications, normally she would think, well, at least at the end I get a baby. But if she knew it in the end, she would have to give the baby away. So in the end, the baby was born a month early, but was healthy and strong, and they handed the baby over to the biological parents, who were extremely grateful for the wonderful gift that they had been given. There's a lot more to the story, and if you're interested in it, you can look up Inconceivable, that's the name of the story, on the Today Show online. So this is an example of a very difficult decision that a couple had to make. By continuing the pregnancy, Caroline knew that her own life was in danger, and as difficult as the pregnancy would be, in the end she would have to hand over her baby, not her baby, but the baby, to someone else. However, Caroline and her husband looked within themselves, and they came up with the only solution that they felt could keep their values intact. They said at one point, they just believed too much in the value of life. The reading from Deuteronomy talks about a covenant being made with God's people. The people were in a covenant relationship with God. God was giving the people rules and guidelines for their lives. But they were not merely to control how the people would act. The people were being asked to hold up their end of the relationship with God. In the Matthew reading, we're still talking about God's law as related by Jesus. Jesus talks about living in right relationship with other people. And as we know, our relationship with others is directly related to our relationship with God. While we carefully consider our own actions and the decisions we have to make in our lives, let us remember how those decisions affect our relationship with God. And one last thing. Even as we attempt to hold ourselves to this high standard of behavior, pushing ourselves as Jesus pushed his followers to be ever more faithful, let us also not forget about God's grace. We are in relationship with a God who loves us and wants us to turn to God in faith. If our faith in God through Jesus Christ is strong, then nothing we do can destroy our relationship with God. As Paul said in his letter to the Romans, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ